Tell me about, and we'll get to what's going on here soon enough and get Connie involved in the conversation. But tell me about the economics of how the school in Harlem runs and how that translates to what's going on here. In other words, what does the budget look like? Why? How? What is the structure of Democracy Prep? Define the organizational charter, if you will, and tell us how the cash flow works.
Absolutely. So Democracy Prep Public Schools is a nonprofit 501c3 entity that now operates schools both in New York and Rhode Island, and we're growing in both places to serve more kids. And as a public school operator, we receive public dollars. In New York, that's about $12,000 per student. In Rhode Island, it's a blended average, which ends up around $11,000 per student. And those funds come from a combination of city and local funding sources. So in Rhode Island, for example, we get 95% of the money that the traditional district would get from 2 years ago. So we're talking about getting substantially less money than a same child if they attended Cumberland Public Schools or Central Falls Public Schools would get. We get less than that public in public funding. But what's remarkable about charter schools generally, but Democracy Prep in particular, is that we actually operate with these amazing results on less dollars per pupil. And we do that on the financial level by budgeting from the classroom up instead of from the superintendent down. So that means that if, let's use round numbers and say that there is $10,000 per student. In Rhode Island, we actually spend a lot more than that. But we have to educate 25 kids for a year. So that means I have $250,000 as a school leader to educate 25 kids for a year. And so that means I can have one teacher at $75,000. I can have a second teacher at $75,000. I can still have $100,000 left over for that classroom to have the books and computers and supplies and field trips they might need to be successful. And if you can't do that, then there's something wrong with the way that you're spending public dollars.
Well, you've got to be able to get the lights on, though.
You do, and so actually, charter schools
shovel the driveways and make sure the sidewalks are clear and make sure that the room is swept and take care of the maintenance of the building.
You got to do all of that, and so what charter schools have proven is that you can do all of that and more with the same public funds. So, in fact, one of the painful things about our current funding policy in Rhode Island is that charter schools don't get money for facilities and aren't granted a building. So we actually have to take money out of our operating expenses, that $12,000, $11,000 a kid, to pay for exactly what you talked about, the lights and the snow and the custodial and all the things that go into it.
Did you in Harlem, because I know here you did you acquire a building?
We did. In New York, we're now in a building that was a community center. It was actually vacant and pretty run down, so we had to put a fair amount of money into it.
So it was cheap.
We did it at about a quarter the cost of what the School Construction Authority in New York builds.
And the building here in Blackstone is what building now?
The building in Blackstone Valley is in the Valley Falls section of Cumberland. It is the Our Lady of Fatima Community Center School building, and it's a nice small building that is good for the beginning of our school. We're going to need to grow, and so we're also looking at expanding to some other school facilities as we work next year to open up not only our kindergarten first grade program, but our first fifth grade program as well.
All right, so the kids came out of a lottery, I'm guessing, as the notoriety. And of course, you started only with the kindergarten here in the Blackstone Valley, and you will add grades because K becomes 1 and 1 becomes 2, and so you'll add at least a grade a year, correct?
Correct, and you're right to say at least, because next year we're adding not only the K1 but also a fifth grade so that we can move even faster. I mean, our mission is about serving kids on a college prep path, and what that means is we need to be able to serve as many kids as want to attend our school. So we hope not to have a waiting list by growing and having more students for more seats for those students who want them.
And the number of students was a couple of hundred for 70 spots who applied, right? What about the teacher pool?
Well, the teacher pool is what makes the difference. So the reason that Democracy Prep is successful is because we have amazing teachers like Connie. And they're teachers who put in a tremendous amount of time and effort. They get paid better than a traditional school teacher, so there's compensation for it. But it's really because they're phenomenal teachers that makes the schools amazing.
How many teachers applied?
So this year we had, for the Rhode Island schools alone, about 500 applications for what ends up being a faculty of 8. In New York, we had about 4,000.
You're a perfect guest because you can get a lot of information in a short amount of time, but you should slow down with that number. You had 500 applications for 8 teaching jobs?
That's right. So those are applications not only from Rhode Island and a lot of local Rhode Island teachers and folks in the local community and traditional schools. And Connie, who can tell you, but she's born and raised in North Providence and was excited to work right near home. But we actually had applications from all over the country interested in moving to Rhode Island to do this work.
How many of the 500 were current Rhode Island public school teachers?
We didn't break down the numbers that carefully, but I'd say about a quarter were current Rhode Island public school teachers, maybe a half.
Well, that's a big distinction, but anywhere from 125 to 250 teachers who are currently teaching in the public schools applied for the 8 kindergarten positions available at this Democracy Prep project.
Correct. And a lot of those teachers are people, for example, that have been accessed. And as you know, in the traditional system, it's often last hired, first fired. And it's based almost exclusively on seniority, which is a real problem when you're trying to hire the best teachers. And so sometimes we found the best teachers who had just been laid off in a big district. So, that's great for a school like us who just wants real quality.
All right. When we come back, you'll meet Connie. She's sitting here nodding her head thinking, did I come to be a guest or a spectator in this conversation? But I wanted to lay out what it is that we're talking about here, folks, and I think Seth Andrew has done a nice job on that. Let me